Welcome to Media in the Mix, the only podcast produced and hosted by the School of Communication at American University. Join us as we create a safe space to explore topics and communication at the intersection of social justice, tech, innovation, and pop culture. And today we welcome guests Jenny and Kylos. Welcome to the Media in the Mix podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. So we're so excited to have you both to talk about something a little, I want to say a little different, but a lot different today, which is really cool. But before we get into that, just to give you a little background, so Jenny is a Washington, D.C. based director, producer, and is the founder and co-artistic director of Rorschach Theatre. Kylos is a professor at American University School of Communication. He also works with Jenny as a projection designer and video producer as a member of the Rorschach Theatre as well. Can you guys give us a little bit of an introduction about how your collaboration came together, how y'all met, and how these projects with the Rorschach Theatre kind of came to be?
Yeah.
Well, I guess those are sort of two parallel stories in a sense. Jenny and I met through mutual friends. We were both doing theater in the early 2000s, just like sort of indie DIY theater. And well, I backed away from that. Rorschach continued and grew, and we've been friends 20-ish years now.
Yeah.
As I was doing video production and work for DJs and clubs, I kept just suggesting and bugging her that Rorschach needed projections or screens in some shows. So 6 years ago, I did projection design for a show titled 410 Gone. And since then, I've done about, I don't know, half a dozen shows, theater productions, doing the video integration, projections, and screens, and became a company member, and I've been working with them regularly ever since.
And so Rorschach started in 1999. We are known for doing found space, site-specific theater, often with a magic realism bent. And we had done that pretty successfully for about 20 years, and then we had a pandemic. And as a small theater company, we were, in crisis mode, trying to figure out what would happen and kind of what our value to the community was, like how to mean something to the people of the city. And so we thought a lot about what resources we had and what we could do. And we had always done a sort of our own version of immersive theater where the world of the story sort of surrounds the audience. And so we came up with this idea for psychogeographies that really had three key tenets. And it was to create community, to make people feel connected during this time, to provide context in a time of crisis, and then to manifest hope, right? And so it became this project where we used our theater craftspeople to create objects like letters, photos, newspaper clippings, things like that, some taken from history, some original creative creations, and then used our theater writers, our playwrights, to come together to tell this 7-chapter story. And we would send the objects to audience members every month, but instead of just exploring it at home, we encouraged them to go out in the world. We sent them a destination to go to, a neighborhood, a back street, something to explore that connected to DC history, but also this magic realism story. And so there were 7 chapters of that, and then it ended in a live outdoor show, an original creation that we all helped write in the summer of 2021 was the first one, and now we are on our third version of that.
Awesome. And for anyone who doesn't know, so this type of world, can you just give us an idea of what magical realism is about? 'Cause sometimes we hear that in the film world. But for anyone who doesn't know, can you kind of just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I think it means, it can mean a lot of different things, but anytime the circumstances of your world are heightened beyond what is, scientific or logical, it's frogs falling from the sky, it's magical transom windows, it's, one of our stories is kind of veered into sci-fi, but it is an element of magic in your everyday world.
It's such a different type of storytelling, immersive storytelling. So I want to ask you both. So what do you feel, and Kylos mostly directed at you because you've kind of worked in that film and video world, what do you feel like is different about this experience in kind of that magical realism and immersive storytelling versus what you would do in a kind of traditional sense?
Well, this is a very different storytelling experience, not on the side of the creators, but very much also on the side of the audience members or subscribers, however we want to phrase them, because you have to go out into the world, or you don't have to. We'll talk about their options, but ostensibly, the way it's structured is you go out in the world and you experience parts of your city, your environment that maybe you wouldn't normally go to, or even if you do, you learn a little bit of history through a fictional story while you're deciphering the objects that come to you each month. And some of that is physical objects or information like in the form of journals and letters, postcards. Other things might be a map, a drawing, a newspaper article, a photograph. We included Polaroids in a recent one. Sometimes we include snacks if it relates to whatever the storyteller, they like this snack or they smell this scent, so the flower is there for you to smell also. So you go to a location and you have these physical things that help tell the story. So it's a very different media experience, and it unfolds over a period of time along a pathway through your city, essentially. And so there's a connection to location that I think is very different than watching a film that takes place at a location. Sure, that's an experience, you can learn things, but you're not there, right? And you don't go with someone next to you and pick apart the elements of a story. And in that way, I think it's very unique and very different from traditional storytelling, or, as we usually think of video, film, theater, what have you. It's both very, I think, personal in the way that you interact with these objects or these elements when you go to a location, but it's also grander than that, because it's not like sitting in the corner with a book where you just absorb the information all on your own. You're still touching something, you're still having an experience that day, where maybe after it you go to a restaurant or coffee shop and you are out in the world and you have other memories attached to this story.
Right.
Yeah. And I loved the idea of imprinting a fictional memory on a place. So the street you walk down to go to work every day, you suddenly have this memory of something historical that you've experienced through this story. It's a kind of way that it can live on that traditional theater doesn't.
I love it. Yeah. The immersive aspect of it is great. Can you just kind of walk us through in a little bit more detail what the audience would expect? So let's say I sign up for this experience. What am I going to expect as an audience member?
Yeah, well, the first box in the first series that we ever did, so you're going to get 7 boxes in the mail. Sometimes they're envelopes, sometimes they're other things, but you'll get a box in the mail, and inside the box there's a wrapped package of tissue, and there's instructions on top of it. So a lot of people choose not to open the wrapped part until they get where they're going. The instructions tell you where to go. You can go anytime you want with whoever you want. Sometimes we'll give you the hours the place is open or something. And we'll give you recommendations for things to do in the neighborhood, things to do if you brought a kid, just to kind of fill out your experience. And so the first one that we did was at Rock Creek Church Cemetery. And when you opened that box, there was a very old-looking 7 or 8 page letter that had already been opened, a piece of lavender, a map through the cemetery, and 3 photos with notes written on the back. And so you explored those objects, and a story unfolded, and the letter itself sort of told you where to go through the cemetery, but it was written in a character's voice. And so each chapter is something similar to that. We are constantly being challenged to think of new ways to tell stories. We very much wanted to be tactile and kind of low-tech initially, because everyone was doing Zoom theater, and we wanted something else. But there's so much amazing technology that we've talked about and thought about looking at how to work that in to just expand upon what we're doing in already tangible ways.
And also, to jump off that, ostensibly I was brought in the initial planning to just create, well, not just, but the idea was I would create a video walkthrough of the locations, partially because it was at the height of the pandemic and people may not want to go out, right? So I create a video walkthrough that you can access through our YouTube. We send out a private link to our subscribers, and you can experience the location that way. Also, if it's the weather's bad that week and it was the time you can go, there's plenty of reasons otherwise. And we've had a number of out-of-town subscribers at this point who follow along and just use the YouTube videos as a way to experience the location. And that grew for me, from not just creating the video walkthroughs, but we've done some in-world or in-story media, like voicemail, a couple of original videos from a character that was like unearthed, and now you can watch it, right? And from there, I've done a bunch of photoshopping of both design elements like brochures that a character had in their hands or created, or a video installation in Old Town.
Yeah.
Well, but more than just a video installation, it was like a room installation that our subscribers would go to and look through the window at this character who's squatting in a storefront in Old Town, and design some video that's running on his television screens. And I even designed a cocktail for a wedding party in one box.
It's a real Renaissance kind of situation. Yeah.
And I've started to write a lot of, take on more writing chores over the years too. So it started with video, and then I grew into some other roles.
Lots of, everybody kind of has their hands in a lot of areas.
All of us are dealing with multiple
and
hats.
the videos that Kyle makes have been so interesting because, the city is constantly evolving and changing, and it has served as this, really ability to capture a moment in time where we will, in one of the chapters, we directed people to look for this old sign that had been here for 25 years. And during the course of our project, the sign came down.
Right.
So we could go back to the video and kind of have this capturing of that
reference.
moment. Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. And then I read, and I really want to get into this because this seems so cool, but I would like more clarification. So I heard there's a live performance at the end. Yes. Can you elaborate on that? And the audience gets to be involved. That's the part where I'm intrigued, and I'd like to learn more.
Yeah. So we've done them a little bit differently each time. The first one was, written from scratch as we went, and we put together pieces that connected to the story that we'd already written, and it was an outdoor performance where people sat out on the lawn at the parks at Walter Reed and experienced that. The most recent one, Chemical Exile, this past summer, was in an old office building, and it was something like 26 rooms that people walked through and experienced, and that was a very active, on your feet, immersive kind of situation. The one that we have coming up is called Angel Number 9, and it is set in a series of rock clubs in the 90s, and so we're going to build a rock club, and hopefully you can have some cocktails while you watch the show, and the cast is also a band who'll play while you're there, and so it will really immerse you in the world.
So I noticed you said cast. So in terms of the production process, are you hiring people for the final performance? Are you hiring people to do voiceover and these voicemails?
Yeah.
How does that work?
So for the boxes, the actor side is more voiceover. Sometimes in film as well. There's been some places where we've used people, and then we do have a more traditional casting process for the final show. Yeah. So sometimes those people carry through. Sometimes they're new people. But.
Yeah.
And to jump off that the final show revolves around a band. This, I think I'm correct in saying this season has sort of a more directed theme in that it's a lot of, we'll say, some hidden, some not so hidden DC music history. So that ties a lot of it together, and we've actually been discovering a lot of interesting facts around DC music history in many, many different genres, eras, and styles. So
do you want to share a fun fact that you've learned?
We can share some things, I think. John Philip Sousa wrote a magical realism novel.
Yeah, a couple of novels,
Yeah. That was a fact that we discovered that I don't think any of our team knew.
Nope.
We, at the risk of spoiling anything, so any subscribers out there.
Don't spoil anything.
Be careful. But our most recent chapter touched upon a ethnomusicologist who was based out of DC, Alice Fletcher, and her recordings of an early Korean pop boy band in, I'm going to get the years wrong.
I think it's the 1890s, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's really early.
Wow.
And we could talk about that story itself for 45 minutes.
Right.
But we'll just keep it to that fact. It's very interesting.
That is really interesting, actually. Very cool. And so before we get into this season's project, what have you guys learned, if anything, from season to season? Is there something major you've learned starting from season 1 to where you guys are at now, which is season 3?
I mean, I think for me as an artist, one of the big picture things I learned was to not be afraid of doing something ridiculous, and had the pandemic not happened, we wouldn't have done this, but having that breath and just being unafraid to jump into something that seems wildly out of what you've done in the past was a big lesson for me.
Yeah.
I feel like what I keep going back to is the challenges that we have to overcome in storytelling. Not to lead into your next question.
And that's a good transition to it, because I feel like this process and what Jenny was just saying is thinking so outside the box, I'm sure comes with its own challenges.
Right. Well, we'll come up with a story that might be very robust for a chapter, and then it's how much of this information can we communicate through the objects and the artifacts that we're including. So it's always a challenge of, having this much story, but only this much space to put it in, or doing it in a way that doesn't feel too repetitive.
Right.
I would say there's an appropriate amount of repetition, and then there's an appropriate amount of, we already did a photograph in the last 2 months, or we already did a sprig of lavender, and or a piece of bubble gum, or what's going to contribute to this story this month that feels a little fresh comparatively.
There's a lot of journalers and letter writers
A lot
in our
of journals and
stories.
letter writing.
Maybe more than in the average world.
Yeah, it does fall on that a bit. We try to branch out when appropriate, but it becomes kind of a fail-safe.
Yeah, but we've done all kinds of things. I mean, there was a chapter in the last one that took place at a wedding, and so the woman wrote a letter on the backs of receipts for the tuxedos and, all kinds of things that you'd have around, and it was clipped together with a bobby pin. So we really try to let people live in the world of the story and be able to touch and hold things that...
Details sound
So,
very, yeah.
right, and that's good to mention that sometimes the letters are actually on an artifact of some sort. We just did a chapter that was based in DC punk rock history of the 80s, and there's 2 flyers, one from a Washington for Jesus rally. I'm going to call it that way.
Reagan and Jesus.
Reagan and Jesus.
Reagan and Jesus.
in '88, and then a punk show that was happening the same night that had taken the flyer and defaced it to be their flyer.
Cool. Yeah.
So both flyers have information on the back that relates to the stories. Someone's taking notes, a band's writing their set list, things like that.
Yeah, I was thinking of something else that's sort of been a challenge or a way that we've evolved. One component of this project is we do a monthly Zoom salon so that we can actually create that community and get people together. And we bring in guests from the community to talk about something related to the chapter. And what's been so interesting about that is to listen to our audience talk. And because we're still building the story, we can sometimes shift and adapt the story as we go based on questions people have or interests that they have. And so it's been really nice to be able to kind of have a give and take with our audience in a way that doesn't exist in traditional theater or filmmaking.
Right.
That's very cool.
That's
so
actually a really...
each chapter is a month.
Right.
So you receive the box or whatever it may be that month, and you can then shift to the next and kind of change things around if you feel like.
A little bit, yeah. And so people can join at any time too. So we'll have people who'll
very
join in the spring and they get
Okay.
sent all, the 5 previous boxes. And people can do it in a weekend or two if they are committed to it. Like you can go out and do all the locations. And
you can choose which locations you're going to do at home with the videos and which you're going to go to. And actually, just to connect it, though, a little bit to, we'll say, traditional media creation, our process is not that dissimilar from like a television writer's room.
Right.
Like a group of us got together for a couple days in August, and we sat down and we did a lot of the tasks that when a television writer's room plots out a season. We figured out we have 7 episodes, what's supposed to happen, what do we think should happen, where should they happen, what plot lines are going to go where, and even though that may not all play out the way we planned it, it's very similar in some ways to like that experience.
And then psychogeographies. I want to go back to that word. So recently, before we even started recording, I learned that that's what you call each season, a psychogeography. So can you just explain that word? It's actually the first time I've ever heard of it.
Well, so to be fully honest, we named the project a little bit retroactively. We had already invented the project, and we had created the beginning of Distance Frequencies, and I was actually doing another podcast interview and called COVID Calls. It was amazing, this podcast, with a disaster historian who did a podcast every weekday throughout the pandemic. I don't know if it's still going on. Anyway, he's great, so you should look that up too. But as I was explaining this project, he was like, well, you're like aligned with the psychogeographers. And I went, yes, we are. And then I looked it up and I realized that we really were aligned to this, much broader picture of what psychogeographies is and this idea of the psychology and the geography and how you explore space and time either without a purpose or with a sort of abstract purpose. And again, about how like the memories are imprinted, fictional or not, over top of otherwise quotidian spaces. And it just very much fit what we were doing.
Very cool. And now I'd like to go into this current season. Anything you could talk about, tell us about?
So it's ostensibly, it's following, we'll say, cherry-picked moments of DC music history. And we're trying to be as broad and diverse as possible. And so far we've gone from, John Philip Sousa to DC 80s hardcore scene to this Alice Fletcher, ethnomusicologist, and her explorations of music around her at that time, particularly this Korean band of young men who were singing together. And we have various locations and elements of DC music history that we're exploring for our upcoming chapters. I don't want to spoil them since they have not happened yet. Yeah, and it's all going to come together based around a band in the late 90s in this show that'll happen in the summer. This time around, we're writing towards a finished play. So we started with the play, and are writing the elements that lead up to it.
Interesting. Okay.
And like Jenny said, the first time out of the gate, we kind of wrote it as we went and came up with a story that ended the story we were working on. So it made sense and it was fluid, but this time around we kind of approached it a little bit differently.
Right. And that play is still a new play, and so it's still evolving a little bit, so we're able to kind of shape and craft some pieces of it to connect with what we're building on the other end. So
that's so neat, because
they're both-
sometimes in filmmaking and you're the traditional sense, it's kind of like once it's done, it's done. That's like a little terrifying.
And a fun fact is the author of the play, and it's also based on a book he wrote, James Rogers, is the friend that we met through like 20 years ago.
Very cool. Okay, so you guys are all kind of collaborating in this world.
Yeah.
That's very neat. Awesome. How do you bring that creativity to the space when it is an out-of-box idea? Or where do you go to look for inspiration when you're having to come up with new ideas every season, rather?
I mean, I think for me at least, the city is the starting place always. You know, some of the first locations in the first project we did were just places that during the pandemic I had taken my husband and my kid to get out of the house and see where we could go safely. And, you know, so some of the spots started like that. And then once that happens, you start to go down all these routes and you see the sites and you see the opportunities everywhere for what the kind of hidden stories are. And it goes back and forth, you know, so you find something in the real world and you start to research it online and there's some spark or some kernel of information there that sends you off to some other exploration in the real world, and it kind of goes back and forth.
I think that for me, in answer to your question, I think a lot about the details and where to find inspiration for what we're creating in the moment, which is sometimes a lot of fun. For example, when we decided that, you know, this story was happening in the 80s and one of our artifacts was going to be a Polaroid shot the night that this girl goes out in the world and experiences a band for the first time, like a DC punk band. And we were like, well, can we make a Polaroid? And just through this, I mean, not like it's a hidden thing, but discovered that there is a printer that you take a photo on your camera and set it on top and it prints a legit Polaroid. So I sat at home and at this point I've printed probably
200
Polaroids of the same shot, legit like physical Polaroids, like they exist. So things like that I think are always fun. Or when we have this idea like, wait, somebody somewhere has made a guitar pick in the shape of a mermaid, or like this isn't a real suggestion, but we're just like coming up with ideas, and one of us will be searching like, oh yeah, we can get like 600 guitar picks customized from this person, or this company makes this thing. Why don't we try to figure out how that integrates? Or
it definitely lets us discover other artists too, and like what other crazy things are out there that we didn't know about, so we thought, what if?
Cool.
So there's always, you know, this fun like, well, I don't know how to do that, but that's a good idea. Let's figure out how someone else did it, or where can we source the object and do something to that object, if it's not too time consuming, because Jenny's usually heading up the packing up of hundreds of boxes.
We have a whole crew, but that's fun too. A whole angle that had never been a part of my work before, but now we're manufacturing too. So
that's great. Have you guys ever thought about expanding to other cities? Is that like a goal?
We would love to do that. Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
I think the question is just figuring out the bandwidth. We're a small operation, and we would love to do other cities. We've talked about doing really niche things in this city too, like doing one that's just for kids, or doing one that is about us, you know, like we would come to AU and do the history of AU, you know, like there's so many different ideas that we have. It's really just a question of what to do with them.
I'm thinking this might be like a fun office project for us too. Like,
yeah,
maybe we should go visit.
Well, we've talked about that. Like, what is this as like a team building?
It could be like
for
a team building.
Staffs and,
there's so many opportunities here. It's very cool. And then, can you just give somebody an idea of where to go if they want to experience this, or kind of just a process to follow? Yeah,
for sure. The best place to get all the information is at rorschachtheatre.com, our website. Our Instagram is RorschachDC, and our Twitter. And we have Facebook too, I think is Rorschach Theatre. So any of those will put you there.
Awesome. I'll link all of that in the description to this episode as well, so everyone can find that.
Past October, we did a new adaptation of Dracula called Dracula, a feminist revenge fantasy, really. And it was every bit as amazing as that title sounds.
I was going to say.
And we did it in an old disused firehouse on the Parks at Walter Reed campus. So that was amazing. And then in March 27th, we are opening a play called Sometimes the Rain, Sometimes the Sea, which is loosely based on the stories and the life of Hans Christian Andersen, who had kind of a wild life and a lot of interesting relationships. And we have a character that plays a rain cloud, you know, so it's that kind of our world of magic realism is ubiquitous. And then we end with Angel Number 9 in the summer.
Awesome. Okay, so there's other things to
Totally.
go see at
Lots of
Rorschach
ways to
Theater.
get involved, yeah.
Awesome. So RorschachTheater.com if you'd like to visit. Thank you so much, Carlos and Jenny, for coming on the podcast today. It was great to talk to you, learn from you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Riz.
This is great.
If you'd like to check out our bi-weekly episodes dropping on Wednesdays on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, click that subscribe button. And if you'd like to support this podcast and the School of Communication, go to giving.american.edu to donate now. And that's a wrap.